She tells Niall about Gwyn, the first immortal she ever found centuries ago, back when they were both alone in the world. They fought through everything together until they were captured during the English witch trials, burned and drowned over and over because every time they didn't die it proved the case against them. Eventually the court sentenced Gwyn to be sealed inside an iron coffin and dropped into the ocean. Andy escaped and spent decades trying to find the ship and the coffin and never did. Gwyn has been at the bottom of the sea ever since, drowning and coming back and drowning again for over 500 years. That night Niall wakes up screaming. She saw it in a dream, the iron box, the black water, the bloody fists hammering from the inside. The whole team goes quiet when she describes it. Niall tells Andy she doesn't want any of this. Andy tells her it's happening whether she wants it or not. Then Merrick's men find the safe house and the attack comes fast. In the chaos Joe and Nikki get captured and loaded onto a plane. Andy and Booker and Niall scatter. Andy gives Niall a car and tells her to run. She has time left with her family before they notice she isn't aging and she should use it. Then Andy and Booker go after Copley. They find him. Andy has her hands around his throat when Booker tells her to stop and listen. Copley explains everything. After his wife died of ALS, he devoted himself to tracking the team's history, following every ripple of every life they ever touched. He built a room full of photographs and documents going back centuries. In Montenegro in 1916, Andy saved a family of refugees whose daughter would go on to discover the early detection technique for diabetes. In Cambodia, that same daughter's grandson saved 317 people from the Khmer Rouge. A man Andy pulled out of danger in the 1970s prevented an accidental nuclear exchange and likely saved civilization from itself. Generation after generation. Lives built on lives, all of it invisible to Andy, all of it tracing back to her. Copley thought he was handing Merrick a gift for humanity. He understood too late that he was handing Merrick 4 people to lock in a cage forever. Then Booker's betrayal lands. Andy rounds on him. He worked with Copley from the start. He told them where to find the team. He set the whole thing up because after watching his youngest son die of cancer at 42, he wanted Merrick to find a way to end their immortality. He wanted to be allowed to die. Andy doesn't get the chance to respond because she's still bleeding from the gunshot she took during the attack. And she's not healing. Booker looks at the wound and goes pale. Her immortality is gone. Nobody knows when it ended or why. It just happens. One day the wounds stop closing and that's it. Merrick's men arrive and take them both. At Merrick's facility in London, Joe and Nikki are already strapped to tables in a private lab on the 15th floor with a doctor cutting pieces off them for samples while Merrick watches and talks about Nobel Prizes. Joe tells Merrick that what he's doing is not science, it's immoral. Merrick says he's heard that before and doesn't care. Niall shows up. She ditched the car, ditched the weapons, thought about her mother's voicemail and her brother's face, and drove straight back. She fights her way through the building floor by floor, finds Copley on the way, and he gives her the access card to the lab. He tells her to go before the noise starts and wishes her luck. She keeps moving. She gets to Joe and Nikki and cuts them loose. They fight their way out and link up with Andy and Booker. Andy tells Booker to his face, the two of them have been doing a terrible job of living and it stops now. They walk out together. The team goes for Merrick. The final push through the building is brutal. Merrick has at least 30 private security, all of them ex-military, led by a man named Keane who is ex-special forces. The team tears through every floor anyway. Andy takes round after round and keeps moving, mortal now, bleeding with every hit but refusing to stop. Niall stays on her, covers her, gets her through. Merrick makes it to the penthouse and tries to use Andy as leverage. All the lives she could save, all the suffering she could end, she is priceless. Andy asks Niall if she thinks he speaks Russian. Niall doesn't know why that matters. Andy tells him to play dead and throws him out the window. In the aftermath, the team votes on Booker. His punishment is exile, 100 years completely alone, cut off from all of them. Niall argued for less. Andy says she expected more. Booker accepts it. He and Andy say goodbye and she tells him to have a little faith. Copley gets something unexpected. Andy sits him down and shows him what she's decided. When the team leaves traces in the world, Copley sweeps them. He protects them from people like Merrick. He finds them the jobs that matter. He says he'd be honored. Niall arranges with Copley to be listed as killed in action so her family can grieve and move on without wondering where she went. She leaves something at her brother's door before she disappears. The very last shot is not the team. It's the ocean. A hand breaking the surface. Gwyn pulling herself up onto a dock. Alive, free after more than 500 years in that iron box. She tracks down Booker's apartment in Paris and knocks on his door. He opens it. He has no idea who she is. She introduces herself. The look on her face as she does is not relief. They land outside Paris in a small abandoned town called Goussainville, and the whole place has been empty for 50 years and the team is holed up there, and Niall finally meets everyone properly: Booker, who died fighting alongside Napoleon, Joe and Nikki, who met during the Crusades on opposite sides and killed each other multiple times before falling in love, and Andy, who is so old she can't remember her own mother's face, and when she says that, it hits in a way you don't expect, because we all fear losing the people we love, but imagine losing even the memory of what they looked like and still having to keep going, and that's Andy's reality, every single day. And then Niall has a dream, not about the team this time, but about a woman trapped inside an iron coffin at the bottom of the ocean, drowning over and over again and waking up and drowning again, hammering her fists bloody against the iron, and it never opens. And Niall wakes up shaking and tells the team what she saw, and the whole room goes quiet because that woman has a name. Her name is Gwyn, and she was the first immortal Andy ever found, her closest companion for centuries, and the story of how she ended up in that coffin is one of the most genuinely devastating things in this entire film. Booker explains it in a flashback. Andy and Gwyn were in England during the witch trials, trying to free people who had been accused of witchcraft, and then they themselves were caught and accused and sentenced, and when they kept surviving the executions, it only confirmed the accusation in everyone's mind, so they were sentenced again and again and burned alive and drowned, and each time they came back until finally the authorities separated them because they were too powerful together, and Gwyn was locked in an iron coffin and thrown into the sea, where she has been drowning and reviving for over 500 years, and Andy has spent all that time unable to find her and carrying the guilt of that failure like a wound that never closes, and this is why Andy is so exhausted at the start of the film, because she has been living with this for centuries. Back to the villain of the story, his name is Stephen Merrick, the youngest CEO in pharmaceutical history. And he's the one who got Copley to set the team up because Copley brought him footage of the Immortals surviving wounds that should have killed them, and Merrick became obsessed with unlocking their genetic code because he believes he can use it to end disease and extend human life, and in theory that sounds almost noble until you understand his actual plan, which is to lock all four of them in a private lab indefinitely, cut slices off them for years, and never let them leave because dead people can't tell his competitors what he's doing, and he frames this as a moral obligation while he's actively torturing people in a basement, which is the kind of logic that should make your skin crawl. Copley lures Andy into a trap at an old train station, and she walks in expecting to find him, and instead she finds Merrick's security team led by a man named Keane, and they capture her, and Joe and Nikki are already in Merrick's facility in London being experimented on, and Booker reveals that he was the one who gave them up, and when Andy realizes it was Booker who betrayed them, she just looks at him and says, "What have you done?" in the quietest voice, and it is somehow more devastating than if she had screamed at him. The reason Booker did it is tragic in the way that only real grief can make someone do something completely wrong. He had 3 sons who all died. The youngest died of cancer at 42 years old, while Booker stayed exactly the same age he was when he died fighting Napoleon. And he genuinely believed that if Merrick could unlock the immortality gene, he might find a way to end it and give Booker a way to finally die and stop outliving everyone he loves. And you understand his logic even as you watch it blow up in his face, because grief makes people desperate, and desperate people make choices they can't take back. Niall in the meantime has managed to slip away from the capture, and she ends up in Copley's home and goes through his research and finds something extraordinary: a wall covered in photographs and newspaper clippings, hundreds of them, all mapping the ripple effects of every life Andy and her team have ever saved, and it stretches across centuries. A woman Andy saved in Montenegro in 1916 went on to discover the technique for early detection of diabetes. Another person's grandson saved 317 people from the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. One man prevented an accidental nuclear exchange in 1978 and almost certainly saved all of civilization, and these people never knew Andy existed, and Andy never knew the consequences of what she did, and Copley has spent years tracing the chain, and the point of it is that sometimes the work that feels meaningless in the moment is actually the most important thing a person can do, and you just never get to see it. And that speech changes Copley. He looks at what he's done and he goes to Merrick's facility to try to stop it, and Merrick turns on him immediately because Merrick only ever cared about the outcome, not the method, and Copley realizes too late that he handed extraordinary people over to a man who sees them as lab mice. There's something important happening with Andy at the same time. She's been shot during the capture and she's not healing, and Merrick's doctor notices it, and when Merrick asks why, Andy says her immortality is gone. Just like that, no warning, no countdown, just gone. And this terrifies Merrick because if she can die, then his experiment is already failing, but it also means Andy is now mortal for the first time in thousands of years, and the fear on her face is not fear of dying, it's closer to something like relief mixed with terror, the feeling of a door you never thought would open suddenly swinging wide. Niall decides she's going in to get them out, and she climbs into Merrick's building using access credentials Copley gave her, and she fights through the security team on her own, and she is absolutely remarkable. every bit the soldier she was trained to be, and she finds Joe and Nikki first and the three of them fight their way to Andy and then the whole team is back together and Booker is with them too because Andy made the decision to bring him along, not because she's forgiven him but because right now they need every body they have. They go after Merrick on the roof and the final confrontation is in the penthouse with Keen's remaining security team between them and Merrick and Andy goes through them like a force of nature even without her immortality. She told Niall that this changes nothing. They walk out of here like always, together, and they do. Joe and Nikki and Niall clearing the floors while Andy pushes through to Merrick directly and Merrick is standing on a high balcony screaming about everything she could give the world and the Nobel Prize and the lives they could save and Andy asks Niall one question, does he speak Russian? And when Niall says she doesn't know Andy tells the pilot in Russian to play dead and Merrick turns around confused at the wrong moment and Andy throws him off the building and Niall grabs her at the last second so she doesn't go over too and that's it, that's Merrick gone. In the aftermath the team has to deal with Booker and they vote and the decision is unanimous, 100 years alone, no contact, no team, no family, and when Booker says he expected less Andy says she hoped for less too but she expected more and he is put out into the world by himself for a century to understand what he cost them and what it means to live with that and you can see on his face that he knows he deserves it. Niall has a conversation with Andy about what comes next and Andy tells her she was already healing faster on the plane, she's adapting quickly, and Andy says she thinks Niall showed up right when Andy lost her immortality so she could see what it was like to feel unbreakable again, to be reminded that there are still people in the world worth fighting for. And it's quiet and honest and it doesn't try to wrap things up too neatly because immortality is not neat and grief is not neat and living 4,000 of years is not neat, it's just a very long commitment to showing up anyway. Copley sits down with Andy at the end and he lays out every documented consequence of every life she's ever touched and he tells her that when you consider how old she is the good she's done becomes exponential and maybe that's the why, maybe that's the reason for all of it, and Andy looks at all of it on the wall, all these lives she never knew she saved, and she agrees to let Copley work with them going forward, protecting their tracks, covering their footprints, finding them the jobs that need doing and keeping the world from knowing they exist. The movie ends with Niall leaving her family behind, letting Copley stage her death so her mother and brother can grieve and move forward, and she makes one call to hear her mother's voice one more time before she goes, and she rides away with the team into whatever comes next. And the very last scene is a woman sitting alone in a bar somewhere and she looks at a man across the room and something crosses her face, recognition, memory, and then the screen cuts to black because that woman is Gwen. And she is out of the coffin and she has found Booker and where that leads is a question this film very deliberately leaves open. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.